Okay, guys, I've got all sorts of incredible guests on my show, but I can guarantee you that none of them, maybe collectively, don't have the number of citations as my next guest. Eric Topol, how are you, sir?
Great to be with you, Gad. Thank you.
It is such a pleasure to meet you. So many things to talk about. Um, I wanted to say that there are two ways by which a man can have a drastic reduction of his testosterone. The first way is to just age. And I think I'm beginning to see that in me as someone who's entered the 50s. The second way is to try to look at your bibliometric record. That is sure to reduce any man's testosterone if they try to compare themselves to your productivity. I don't know if you ever sleep, but just to give people a sense, 1,200 publications, I don't know how that's possible, an H index of 228. It's astonishing. So my hat's off
Um,
to you. I am an author.
well, no, don't be an awe. I'm just a lunatic. That's okay.
So let me just introduce a bit for the people who may not know you. Just give me a second to introduce you. So you are both a cardiologist and a geneticist, a professor of molecular medicine at the Scripps Research Institute in California, in Southern California. You have been elected to the National Academy of Medicine. You have several books under your belt. I mean, some are more technical books, but the three sort of uh, mass books: The Creative Destruction of Medicine, The Patient Will See You Now, and your most recent one released last year, Deep Medicine: How Artificial Intelligence Can Make Healthcare Human Again. Did I get that right?
Absolutely.
So I
And
thought we would start with the most recent book, and then we can work our way backwards, and then we can talk about cardiology and anything else that tickles your fancy. Uh,
sure.
Maybe I could start with the following story. So your book is titled Deep Medicine. Now, back in the mid '80s, I had taken out my undergrad is in mathematics and computer science, and in the mid '80s, I had taken a course with Professor Monty Newborn, who was part of the group, the Deep Blue Gang, the guys who developed the algorithms to play chess against the human grandmasters. So I was first exposed to the ideas of AI and deep learning and search pruning. How do you search through a space to cut all of the different possibilities? Medical diagnostics and AI in the mid '80s, and I was very excited by it then. And then nothing happened. It seemed for the next 35 years. So why is the promise that I had been exposed to in 1985 only result in your great book in 2019? What happened during those 35 years?
Right. Well, that's a really great question. I'm so glad you started off with that because if, as it turns out, I mean, of course, AI is nothing new. 50, 60 years at least of talking about AI, if not more. The new thing really was just a decade ago. And this was the whole idea of these deep neural networks, and the champion of that being Geoffrey Hinton and his colleagues such as Jan LeCun, who, as you know, were recognized not long ago for the Turing Award, like the Nobel Prize in computer science. The reason that was so important was because that was the ability to simulate and exceed any human performance in image interpretation. It really goes back to Fei-Fei Li's work to develop the ImageNet, which then gave massive labeled images, and to see whether machines could actually see things that humans couldn't. And so once we crossed that barrier, that threshold, then deep learning, which of course is not necessarily the last greatest thing in AI, but it was the most transformative thing, and certainly in healthcare. So that took us then to the image that kept getting better and better, still getting better. And of course, images are really important in medicine. But then it moved on to speech, and now the next frontier is to text. So these are all basic massive jumps, quantum jumps in our capabilities of using machines to boost human performance. And now, every day there's something else that adds to the story, which is, potentially having the biggest impact in medicine in history.
Wow. Well, you mentioned Turing. So, in going back to the mid '80s that I mentioned earlier, that's when I had first heard of the Turing test. And for our viewers who don't know what it is, this is so. For example, if I'm interacting with someone on the other end, and I'm unable to tell whether it's a human or a algorithm that I'm interacting with, then in that sense it has passed the Turing test. And the context in which I had originally heard of the Turing test being used is in clinical therapy, right? Where you don't know if the person or the machine that you're interacting with, on the other hand, is a human therapist or an algorithm. So that was the first case in a medical setting that I had heard of it. Now you mentioned imaging. So I would think radiology would be an example. Ocular stuff, ophthalmology would be one, right? So is it so far restricted to these types of pattern recognition contexts, or where else do we see AI in medicine?
Yeah, well, it turns out in medicine, I think what's becoming more evident is how much we do rely on patterns,
right?
And how that actually is across the board in every specialty, and it's not even just physicians, it's nurses, it's paramedics, it's every walk of life in medicine. But to your point about it isn't just the ophthalmologist or the radiologist, pathologist, dermatologist. But one of the interesting things, Gad, is the gastroenterologists. They're not mentioned very much, but they're the ones that have done the randomized trials. And they have found polyps much more with deep learning than what the human eye can find. And
so this is a colonoscopy that is not picked up with the human eye, but the machine picks it up.
The machine picks up all these polyps that the top gastroenterologists miss. And that's important because if you go through a procedure and all that prep and all that, hassle is a nice word for it. It's just not pleasant. And you don't want to miss a polyp that could be cancerous. And the ones that can be cancerous are these flat and sessile and small polyps. And so that's a big advance. Randomized trials, there's several now. So there isn't a specialty in medicine that doesn't benefit from having machine support and using these deep neural networks. So those patterns are helping already for accuracy, but the next wave is speech, because the problem we have today with clinicians is they're typing at a keyboard, and that is not a way to spend time. That is this data clerk function. But soon enough, and actually starting even in recent months, the keyboard can be eliminated. Liberation from keyboards, and that's exciting because then we can restore at least eye-to-eye contact, get rid of these clerk-like functions for clinicians, and that's another big jump in the field.
Amazing. So I think in both your Brooks interview and in the original one that I had been exposed to your ideas, the Sam Harris interview, you mentioned an amazing study. And so let me summarize, and then you'll correct me. I'm undoubtedly going to get something wrong. But you talk about the study where ophthalmologists try to predict based on, I guess, the retinal pattern, if it's a male or female, and they don't get it better than flipping a coin. Whereas an algorithm that has learned gets it, I think it was 97%. Am I getting this right?
Right, exactly. This was one of the most striking,
unbelievable,
I think, examples. Yeah, so if you show the retinal image to the top retinal experts, and you say, is this from a man or a woman? It's 50-50. That's the best they can do. Whereas, machines can tell with 97% accuracy because they've been trained by hundreds of thousands of retinal photos, and they see things that we can't. Machines are just, yeah.
Excuse me for interrupting you, but are you then able to reverse engineer their 97% classification? In other words, are you able to then say, well, here are the 6 cues that the human eye is unable to detect, or you can't. It's just, it does it, but you don't know how it does it.
Yeah, well, that's a really critical point, is that once you have the outputs that are so striking, then you can deconstruct the algorithm. You go backwards. And yes, just recently it was reported the features that seem to be missed by humans that are being picked up by machines. And that theme of deconstructing these neural networks to find out why is another way we learn about medicine and biology and science. Really interesting. So yeah, and now, I read cardiograms. I love to read cardiograms as a cardiologist, I can never tell. I still today cannot tell you if that's a male cardiogram or a female cardiogram. Again, 96% accuracy. Things that I can't see, that has not been deconstructed yet.
Wow.
But yeah, so this amazing power. Now, you and I know that there are better ways to define if it's a person, male or female, than the retinal photo or the electrocardiogram.
Well, based on what I now hear in gender studies, your genitalia is no longer sufficient to tell whether you're male or female.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. There are more practical ways, like, you don't have to go to these extremes, but it's more just to demonstrate that there's a lot of this. We have discounted our vision, our capabilities as compared to training machines with algorithms. These are some very powerful examples. And of course, there's many, many more.
So, in your own practice as a cardiologist, how much has AI, made inroads within your specialty?
Oh, it's had an enormous impact. I think it's just the beginning, but for years, I've been using a smartphone ultrasound. So when I listen, I don't listen to the heart. I haven't used a stethoscope in about a decade.
Wow.
And I'm actually amazed that anyone would wear and use these rubber tubes, analog, that record nothing. And that everyone can hear what you hear. There's nothing that's reproducible. Yet it's the icon of medicine, Gad. I mean, the stethoscope is the icon of medicine. Anyway, we have the tool that you connect to your smartphone. I can show it to you.
Please, please.
Let's see. What did I do with it? Let's see. Looks like somebody moved. Oh, here it
is. Let me just say before you get going, I am glad that you did not bother to wear full pants for our interview. Thank you for that.
All right. There you go. Well, it's summertime in California, Anyway, so here is my smartphone.
Okay.
And, I can just take this phone and plug it in here like this. And I go to the app for imaging. And here's a little gel. Sometimes if I don't have the gel, you can just use a lotion, anything. You put it on the end here like that. And then you're ready to image any part of the body. Part of the body.
Wait, and this is kind of medical level quality imaging?
As good as the fancy hundreds of thousands of dollars cost of machines.
That's unbelievable.
And, which we published on, of course. And so this is the most transformative device. Now, why you asked about AI, right? The reason why this is so important is, I was trained back in the 80s to learn how to do and read echocardiograms of the heart, the ultrasound of the heart. But most people may not have had training in ultrasound, or if they had it, they don't have confidence. But now AI is being used. So now I can have my 6-year-old grandson. He could take this device and image any part of his body because it has AI guidance, where they will say, turn the probe this way, turn it that way, move it up, move it down.
Wow. To
acquire. And then as soon as you get locked in, now for the heart, then it will automatically capture the video loop. And when you see the heart, which is now everything about the heart, the chambers, how strong is the contraction, the valves, you don't ever listen to Love Dove anymore. You say, forget the sound.
So you're picking up a lot more information through doing this than through the auditory stethoscope, basically. That's what
exactly. And the patient can see it with you, and it's so impressive. You don't have to send the patient to the formal ultrasound. The image quality is really spectacular. And the other thing about all this is now the AI is being used to provide the interpretation. So all you have to do is be able to have your hands to put on the part of the body you're interested in, except the brain. You can't image the brain, but any other part of the body. And then you could get directed with AI how to do the image, and then you can get the image interpretation. Now, of course, you may want to go over that interpretation with a expert, but a radiologist, if it's like, let's say, a liver or gallbladder, or a cardiologist if it's the heart. The key point here is, though, AI is having a big effect there. And then the one that's having even a bigger effect than ultrasound is the heart rhythm. So the first AI that was approved for consumers in medicine health was the smart watch, the Apple Watch, for atrial fibrillation detection.
So this is arrhythmia, basically.
This is
arrhythmia. So if you don't have a regular beat, okay.
Exactly. So you can diagnose atrial fibrillation or abnormal heart rhythm just by wearing your watch, and you basically will get an alert on your watch from a deep learning algorithm. It knows your resting heart rate, and when you are at rest, which you can tell from the accelerometer sensor, and your heart rate is going abnormal, the rate is abnormal, it will give you a haptic warning, give you a warning to take your cardiogram. And then you press the button, you get your cardiogram, and then it will interpret it for you.
Wow.
So this is all deep learning algorithm for the patient. And this helps considerably because, I have many patients with heart arrhythmias. Either they already have it or they're at risk because of their symptoms. And so for those people, that can be very helpful.
Now, so this is kind of, I don't know if the term is still being used, but the quantify yourself movement, right? Now, here's a question for you. Now, my psychological mindset is such that I'm a very cool and calm guy, but when it comes to my health, I turn into a complete hypochondriac, neurotic freak, right? I mean, the worst enemy. I'd rather hang out with ISIS fighters than to go see my physician. I mean, that borderlines on being true. I'm terrified of anything medical. If I have a scratch, that's it. I'm going to die tomorrow. It's all over for me. Good night, everybody, right? So could it be that when you are exposing me to all this information, if I don't have the right, psychological makeup to receive this input, it could almost put me in a paralysis state, right? Because I get that haptic warning and then I go into an infinite loop of doubting. So has anybody ever sort of studied this type of issue?
Well, it's a very good point, and that's why we have to be very prudent about using these tools because it can make people highly anxious. It turns out that some people, they're just kind of wired anyway, no matter what, and whatever you do is it potentially going to make things worse. Now, if let's say a situation that you present, but if you had a racing heart and you did this immediately, you didn't have to call a doctor, you didn't have to go to the emergency room, right, or you didn't have to go to a clinic, and immediately you had an algorithm tell you everything's cool, it's normal. That would give you relief, right? So there's two sides of the story here. The problem is that when any of these tools are used in the wrong way, the wrong people, the wrong time, we can make things worse. We have to acknowledge that. But to your other point is, it hasn't been carefully studied.
I see.
That is the anxiety, the cyber.
Oh, I'm sensing a collaboration with Mr. 1200 Publications. We'll talk about that after the fact. Maybe I could ride the Eric Topol wave here. But,
That's funny.
Wait a minute, you went. Oh, I can't see you anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Something happened with your camera. Oh, you're back. Okay, good. So let me ask you this. Much of what we've been talking about so far in terms of AI applications in medicine seem to be under the rubric of diagnostics, right? So, which, by the way, makes me think that a show like Something is Killing Me. Do you know that show on TV?
Oh, right.
It's a medical mystery show. And I always think to myself, why are they all these medical mysteries? Why can't they just enter all the symptoms into an AI thing and in 14 seconds, or if not less, get the actual outcome? But anyways, in any case, so if much of this is in the diagnostic world, next step, of course, is the prescription world, right? Okay, so now we know you have rare 1 in a million disease XYZ. Now, what are the decision tree that we must go down? I guess we're not there yet. We're much more in the diagnostic world than the prescription world. Is that true?
Right. No, it isn't really right for treatment. And the reason for that is, and I'm actually glad about that, that it's not right for treatment, with some exceptions, because you really want to have human oversight. You want to have a doctor, someone who knows what's going on, because algorithms can have mistakes. Algorithms and machines can be hacked, and software glitches. We all know and experience this. So you don't want to trust the machine only. Now, there are some exceptions, and this is the kind of doctorless thing, whereas, now today we have new algorithms to give people autonomy. So if you have a urinary tract infection and you're in the UK, you can go to the pharmacy and get the AI kit to diagnose your urinary tract infection, and you can also get an antibiotic in the UK without a doctor. Or you can now get your child's ear infection diagnosed. And if you're not in the US, you still need to get a doctor prescription. But if you're in many countries, you can get the antibiotic without a doctor. Also, skin lesions. You can get your diagnosis of a skin lesion, and then you could find out what treatment might be, like an ointment that might help a rash. These are things that are not life-threatening. And maybe it's okay to not have a doctor weigh in. But most things that are serious, you don't ever want to trust the algorithm with the treatment side, because it's the treatment, no less the misdiagnosis, that can be real trouble.
Well, that's a great way to set up my next question. Are you familiar with the psychologist? He's now passed away, Paul Meehl, Meehl. Do you know who that is?
I've heard the name, but I don't know his work.
So let me just kind of give you the back. So Paul Meehl is one of the I think it's very relevant to the AI stuff that you write about. So he was one of the preeminent psychologists to study the difference between actuarial judgment and clinical judgment. And what he means by this is actuarial judgment would be when you're using a model, even something not as complicated as a AI deep learning algorithm, but you're using a regression to establish whether this candidate should be admitted to graduate school or not. Okay, so that would be an actuarial model. A clinical model in that language would be a human doing it, right? And so it turns out that even if you show prospective applicants, students, that it is much safer for your future to be determined by actuarial models, because they don't suffer any human biases. You were talking about the glitch of the algorithm. Let me give you the opposite end, right? If my blood sugar is low because I'm getting hangry, right? I'm getting hungry and hence angry. I might make a different, right? I might make a different decision given the same set of dossiers than if you gave me the exact same dossiers after I've eaten lunch and I'm now satiated, right? Those are the vagaries of human decision making. Whereas if you input the exact same parameters into an actuarial model, that bias is removed. Yet most people would say, I don't feel comfortable having my future decided by a cold model. I prefer to have the human with all of his or her biases decide for me. So how do you integrate what I just said within what you're talking about in medicine, right?
Oh, I think it integrates beautifully. I think that, this whole notion in medicine that you'd have machines outperform doctors is really the wrong thing. It goes back to, the Gary Kasparov and the chess, where, Big Blue versus the machine versus the man, the grandmaster. That is, and of course, he's been a great inspirational force for me. He's an amazing man, and what he's taught all of us about, AI and effects in humans. But the problem in medicine is it's this conflict. And all the studies, if you read them, it outperformed the doctors. It always outperformed it. And that's what we really want, is both. they have complementary outputs, complementary talents, and it applies across the board. It applies outside of medicine as well. So we have to resist this lack of integration, because that's what it's really about.
And within, whether it be within your specialty or within greater medicine across all specialties, what is the percentage of physicians who are now generally familiar with the applicability of AI in medicine? Are you sort of the lone wolf crying out in the wilderness, or is this becoming increasingly, normal science or normal practice?
I would imagine I'm in the wilderness.
Okay.
There's a few, but we're relatively lone rangers out there. There's not enough. I think certain parts that are convenient, like I think more and more heart doctors are buying into the artificial intelligence of reading cardiograms for patients, on their watch, or sending it, on a fingertip sensor. But it's very selective. The use of, for example, the smartphone ultrasound is very, very limited. So, the tools that I see that are already present, it depends a little bit on the field. Like radiologists are embracing AI more than, and certainly now you're starting to see that among certain specialties. But overall, we're in a very, very early phase, and there's a lot of resistance because it's lack of trust and comfort. A lot of physicians and clinicians don't understand these deep neural networks, so they have a fear factor, which is understandable. So overall, we have resistance. We have worries. Some clinicians believe they're going to be put out of work.
Right. Like radiologists would think that, right?
Right. I mean, I don't agree at all with that, because I think that, in fact, it's just a booster function. It doesn't take people out of work. But these are the concerns, the reasons why it's so early.
I mean, I suspect, there's the old MD, PhD programs. I mean, imagine getting an MD and a PhD in, bioinformatics or computer science. This would be a perfect gelling of exactly the type of nexus that you're speaking of, right?
Exactly.
Now, is there such programs now that are flourishing in the top medical schools?
I think they're just getting started now. And there's only, a handful, but I'm sure there'll be much more over time.
Wonderful. Okay, so I wanted to ask, as someone who's interested in decision making, I wanted to ask you a few questions that are specifically related to decision making. First one of which is, I guess, a personal one. Why did you choose cardiology? I'm always fascinated by, what are the cognitive processes that lead people to make the decisions that they do. So just to kind of give you a background, my doctoral dissertation was looking at the following problem, which, by the way, is, I think, very relevant in medical decision making. It's relevant across all decision making. When is it that I have acquired enough information to stop acquiring additional information and make a choice? So this is called the stopping decision, right? So if I'm choosing between two mates to marry, or two cars to purchase, or two politicians to vote for, I don't sample all of the information on them before I make a choice. That's what economists would like to think that we do, but we don't. Instead, we only sample a subset of the information, and then I say, I stop, I'm ready to choose candidate A, I'm ready to marry candidate B. And so I looked at the cognitive processes of the stopping decision in my doctoral dissertation. But that, of course, leads me to, question or be interested in any decision that people make. So why cardiology of all possible fields that you could go into?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I never had intended to do that. So when I was in medical school, I decided I would devote my career to be in diabetes. The reason for that is my father was a type 1 diabetic as a child, and he went blind from retinopathy in his 40s.
Wow.
And he had all the complications. And I, experienced many of what he went through. I would go with him to his appointments for his laser, for his eyes, and all the things that he went through. And I felt that diabetes was a horrible disease, and I would devote my life to that. But what happened was I went to UC San Francisco for my residency, And one of the reasons I picked it was because I had such a strong diabetes group and endocrinology. And what happened was I felt like I was absorbed and electrified by what was going on in cardiology, not expecting it at all. That it was this. We're now talking about 1980, 1981, 82, and what was going on. The field was flourishing. There was clot-dissolving therapies for heart attack. There was balloons to open up the arteries. There was all these active things. They may not be cures, but they were radical, improved treatments. And I was just enamored by it. But most importantly, one person in my training who remains my hero, this fellow named Untitled Chapter. He inspired me because I sat and told him one day, I said, I'm going to be, a diabetologist. He said, no, Eric, you need to be a cardiologist. So anyway, he influenced me. The field was exciting. I don't know how it fits into stop decision process, but anyway, I never looked back.
Is he still alive?
No, unfortunately, he died. He had cancer, and just a few years, pancreatic cancer. And just a few years ago, he died. It was a terrible loss, and one of the great legends in medicine.
Wow. Yeah. Now, in the various medical specialties, rightly or wrongly, and you'll tell me, which of the stereotypes are true or not. And it actually speaks to yesterday to the chat that you had with David Brooks, where he was referring to the neurosurgeons as narcissists. If we look at sort of the pecking order, the top guns are the neurosurgeons. And then the next might be maybe the thoracic surgeons and the cardiologists, and then you go that. To the extent that there is a hierarchy, what defines that hierarchy? Is it the importance that people ascribe to the organ that the specialist deals with? So that, my brain is my personhood. So the guy who's going to SAAD is defined not by his pancreas, but by whatever unique brain I have. Therefore, the guy who's going to treat that has to be the top. And then comes my heart. I mean, not only because it is the pump, but also love is in the heart, metaphorically. So I wonder, has anybody studied how the perceptions of prestige in medicine are determined by which factors, if any?
It's a great question. I had not really ever thought about that to that extent. Everyone always talks about, brain surgeon, if they use that line, and that kind of seems to be the top of the hierarchy, if it really is one. So you're right. I think, there is something to what you're asking about. I don't know that it's ever been laid out like that. There are people like, I've always thought that, for example, the kidney doesn't get enough respect, kind of like the Rodney Dangerfield, and the kidney's just so darn important, and it's just not so high in the hierarchy. But it's true. There is some priority. And the bones doctors, the orthopedists, they don't necessarily get billing either. So the sophistication, but also the importance of the organ to the body's functions, they all may come into play.
I don't know if you saw this. There was an article that came out in the New York Times several years ago. I actually cited in my forthcoming book that looked at political affiliations of physicians as a function of the specialty that they're in. Mm-hmm. And it is extra. So if you were to just say, are physicians right-leaning or left-leaning, then it would remove, because you're aggregating as an average, it actually removes the granularities that can create actually people being on the extreme blue or the extreme red. So I think if I remember correctly, surgeons and anesthesiologists scored very much more to the right, and infectious disease pediatricians and psychiatrists scored very much on the left. I wonder if you have any thoughts, and I'm sure you haven't thought about it, but is there a way that you could explain why people's specialties in medicine might cause them to go into different political tribes, if you'd like?
Yeah, it's a really interesting observation and what you're reviewing. I see it, like, for example, when I write a piece and I get attacked by doctors, and it's a political attack. And it's often, as you say, from the right side, they often, as the specialties that you mentioned. I don't understand it at all, because if you look across the field of science and overall in medicine, you'll find that it has a liberal skew. But there are physicians, certain groups of physicians, certain specialties, that's the opposite. I don't really get that at all, and it's unfortunate. I wish we could just practice medicine and do our science without this interference. You know, it's just unnecessary, and I think it actually detracts from the progress.
Now, so you were saying that much of the criticisms and attacks that are levied at you are really political in nature. Is that because you might be taking a position that is deemed to be political, or are you actually commenting on political issues and then people get upset at you?
Yeah, right. In the midst of this COVID-19, I'm just presenting some data, and maybe about something that is hydroxychloroquine, for example, or it could be the U.S. performance. I'm just presenting data in an unbiased way. Yeah, this is hard facts, and then these people will come up, fellow physicians will attack it. And it seems that the real reason they're attacking is because they support the leadership in the country rather than looking at the data in a hard way. So, they're accusing me of being biased, and I'm just trying to just lay out what is the truth.
Well, you certainly don't strike
with truth these days, right?
And I was going to say that, I mean, of the little that I've been exposed to you, you hardly strike me as sort of the dogmatic, pundit in either directions. You seem to be a very measured, very sober person. But it demonstrates, but I guess it relates very much to my forthcoming book. So just in case you don't know, I look at idea pathogens. So how idea pathogens can parasitize human minds. So in a sense, I'm a parasitologist of the human mind. And so people think, for example, are people on the left more likely to be parasitized, or people on the right, or educated? And I always say, no, everybody could be potentially, everybody could have a potential blind side that causes them to be parasitized by some idea pathogen. And I think what you're saying is that many of your highly educated colleagues, once they see that your position goes against their political position, then they lose their sober, measured lens and they become political tribalists, right?
Absolutely. No, you nailed it. And it's just, I hope someday that will not be the case, but certainly it's more polarized in the U.S. now, I think, than ever before. And I hope it can improve. I think it's almost unidirectional. It has to get better.
Right. By the way, I should apologize to the viewers. Your assistant did warn me that we might have slight audio problem with your Skype, and I am picking it up. So please don't write endless comments insulting us because the audio is bad. We couldn't control it. So our apologies, or my apologies, for the poor quality of audio. But I think we could still hear each other well. So let me ask you this. Since we're talking about COVID, then I'd like to talk about cardiology a bit. So now the new term I hear is lockdown skeptic. And what it means basically is that maybe the lockdown has been a bit too draconian. Maybe it has taken, it's everybody is locked down rather than adjusting the process to different ecosystems. Where do you, I know you're not an infectious disease specialist, but you're obviously a man of science. What's your position on this whole story? Where are we at?
Yeah, no, it's a really important topic because we all want to reopen. No one will question that. The problem we have is that we have, in the U.S. at least, we have not built the infrastructure. All these weeks of being locked down, essentially, or staying home, was a time to get geared up to do test and trace and isolate. And we didn't do it. We have no leadership that is national coordinated. You can't do this just at a state or a county. You need to do this everywhere. So without having a structure to support opening up, we put ourselves in a tough position, because if you try to just say, oh, well, we can send the children out to school because they're, but less likely to get infected or to have bad outcomes. Or you send out young people because they're healthier and less. You're playing the odds rather than doing it with guidance. And I think we are just so behind in establishing the guidance that should be in place right now. And soon enough, fortunately, we'll see tests that will provide a home kit that you do at home, that you get the answer in minutes. You put the results on your phone. It's authenticated to you. Then you can go to the grocery store, to work, to anywhere, because we need to know that people are, because the asymptomatic rate of infection is at least 30%.
Wow.
At least 30%. So that means you don't know who you're being near. You're potentially at risk to either be a carrier yourself because there's so much asymptomatic infection, or to actually get infected from a person unwittingly. So because of that, we need to have this infrastructure in place, which sadly, our country is behaving as if it's a third world entity because it doesn't. It's so dysfunctional. It's not. It's getting better with the tests. I mean, it's getting to 400,000 per day, which is good, but it isn't doing what we need to do, which is, for example, we have a president, now getting back to politics, who says, open up all the churches. Open up all the churches. I demand you to open up the churches. Well, that's a super spreader place. I mean, no, not now. So we can do reopening, but we have to do intelligent reopening, guided reopening, and not dismiss the things we've learned. This disease, this virus has only been with us 6 months. And we've learned so much. We're learning every day. And if we just take that learning to fold into how we navigate the future, rather than just saying, okay, everybody just sick of this home shelter, we're just going to reopen because it's good for the economy. That doesn't show learning. We need to show that we are getting educated and do things in a rational, intelligent, data-driven way.
Now, part of the downstream effects of COVID is actually relevant to your specialty, because, and obviously you know this infinitely more than I do, better than I do, where you are seeing heart consequences, right? Is that due to the fact that there is increased inflammation that causes the heart to not function well when it has such a viral load in the body, or what's the link between COVID and the heart? What's happening there?
Well, it's really interesting because at first everybody thought it was just the lungs,
right?
The virus,
exactly.
Which we've learned that it really does rely on getting in through your nose, and then it gets down to your lower respiratory tract, mainly through you aspirate and it gets in your lungs. But once it gets in your bloodstream, it seeks out the ACE2 receptors that are expressed throughout the body, and it turns out the heart is one of the major target zones. So what happens in some people is it causes very significant heart damage directly.
What's the damage that it does? What is it? Is it causing inflammation of the heart? Is the muscle of the heart dying? What is the damage?
Yeah, it goes right to the heart muscle.
Wow.
And it kills cells. I mean, it basically invades cells. So there's a twofold hit. One is that it gets into cells, this tropism. The other is the immune response of the body to having this alien come into the cells. It then makes things worse. So you have both the direct hit and you have the inflammation, immune hit to the virus penetration into cells. So you can get what looks like a heart attack. We've had hundreds of reports now, cumulatively, of people that they thought it was a heart attack and it was actually COVID.
Wow.
Okay. And then you can have people who have severe COVID with very bad lung effects, and then they also have heart problems. So it's been a totally different. As we learned this disease, because we didn't know when it was in China, but as we learned when it was starting to get through Europe, particularly in Italy, and later in Spain, we learned a lot about the disease. And now, of course, we know it. There's almost no organ that it spares. I mean, the heart is prominent. The lungs, of course, number one. But the kidneys are also very prominent, too, and the brain. So, it's a tough monster. This virus is really, so you have a combination of such severe potential across the body and stealth mode,
Wow.
silent threat. I mean, it's just like, how do you design a pathogen, which is as evil as this, right?
Right. Well, it's in a sense, well, evolution is very relevant in a sense to that discussion, which I was going to ask you next, and then I want to come back to cardiology. I've had Randy Nesse, who you probably don't know who he is. He's a psychiatrist by training, but his cause célèbre, his main claim to fame, is that he has been trying for much of his career to introduce evolutionary thinking in medicine. Right. So in my case, I've introduced evolutionary thinking into the business school, into consumer psychology, into psychology of decision making, into the behavioral sciences. What he's trying to do is teach physicians the importance of understanding the evolutionary processes that result in our organs, that result in diseases and so on. Most of physicians are trained in what is called the proximate level. How and what? How does something operate? What are the factors that make it operate? They never study the Darwinian why, right? What is the evolutionary reason that pregnancy sickness exists in its form? What is the adaptive reason? So have you, now as a geneticist also, you probably are more exposed to evolutionary thinking, but the average mom and pop physician doesn't actually know much about evolution. Number one, why do you think evolution is not sufficiently taught in medicine? And do you think that it would be of value if more physicians knew about evolutionary thinking?
Well, you asked some of the greatest questions.
Oh, aren't you sweet? Thank you.
That's true, because we don't do it. I mean, we aren't trained in it. And overall, we just accept it. If it works, fine. So like a perfect example, you mentioned anesthesiologists earlier. We don't even know how anesthesia works. We don't know how electroconvulsive therapy works. We don't know how a lot of medications work. And we don't ask the why. So we're not trained in that reasoning. And it's really, really important. And so, what's funny about this, since we've been talking about AI, is that we demand machines. We want to know everything. We want to have it fully transparent and explainability in AI. But we don't have the same demands of how we practice medicine. And so I wish we had more evolutionary thinking.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. I would highly recommend, if you have, I know how incredibly busy you are, but whenever you have a moment to spare, read the book Why We Get Sick by Randy Nesse and George Williams, who was a very famous evolutionary biologist, because they really they placed the flag on how to think in an evolutionary medicine kind of way. And I highly recommend for all your graduate students, irrespective of which field they specialize in, to at least have that basic understanding of evolutionary thinking. This is exactly what I basically tell my students, right? If you want to study human behavior, you could study it at the proximate level, the how and what. But if you want to understand the ultimate reason why our cognitive system evolved to be that way, our perceptual system, our affective system, I mean, it doesn't come out of magic. It comes through the exact same evolutionary processes that explain the mating behavior of the salamander or the zebra. And so I think there are wonderful opportunities not only to incorporate AI in medicine, but just to incorporate Darwin in medicine.
Well, you couldn't be more on cue there. It's perfect, actually. And it takes us back to the COVID story in a way, because we're using genomics in detective work to watch the evolution of the virus. Fortunately, it's a slow virus, but we're learning so much about it through temporally, geographically, evolution. No, we need to do much more of it. I'll definitely take you up on that recommendation.
Oh, wonderful. That's exciting. That's exciting. Okay, so I want to talk very briefly about empathy, because I think you touch upon it in the earlier books, but you also have a chapter about it in your latest book, Deep Medicine. And then I want to wrap up with some of the contradictory stuff we hear about how we should live our lives to have healthy hearts. And then we'll call it a day, and then hopefully we can do it again at some future time. So let's talk about empathy. I mentioned earlier that, one of the things that scares me the most in life, more than hanging out with ISIS fighters, is to go visit my physician, precisely because most physicians are jerks. Not you. You're the outlier. You're humble, you're humane, you're kind, you exude goodness. a lot of physicians do have a God complex, right? When they speak to you, I suddenly become a moron, an illiterate moron that I need to be talked down to, like the idiot slope guy that I am, right? And that, of course, can cause a lot of angst in you. You get anxious. You feel disrespected. So, what is it that's causing this problem? Is it that people who are not empathetic decide to go into medicine? Is it that they have to not be empathetic so they can deal with all the ugliness they see every day? Where is the empathy lag coming from?
Well, this is a central topic because, as it turns out, there was a lot more empathy if you go back decades in medicine. If you go back to, when I finished medical school right around 1980, there was a deep relationship. And your relationship with your doctor was special. You had trust, that you had time, the gift of time when you would go and have a visit. And this was an intimate relationship. And when you met with your doctor, it was a presence. You saw that the doctor was listening to you. He was actually, looking at you, not on a keyboard. And there was communication and there was empathy. Now, what's happened in the decades since then is that has been an attrition, terrible erosion. And so now we have only limited number of minutes. We're not even looking at the patient. And there's been this basically fracture of the relationship. Terrible situation. Now, that is the whole premise of the deep medicine book is, it's not enough to correct the inaccuracies, not enough to have fancy algorithms. But if we use that and deploy that to restore the way medicine, the essence of medicine is human interaction. And it comes with also the idea that we're not training the right people now because we pick people, how good are they on their grade point average? How good are they on their admission test scores, MCATs? Well, maybe what we should be paying more attention is how good are they in terms of empathy and communication and interpersonal bonding. Because with the help of AI, we need less of the brainiacs. I mean, it's nice to have very smart people. But we need more of this capitalizing on, as machines get smarter, people need to get more human, more than any time. So the other thing that you brought up, though, Gad, is the paternalism.
Yes.
And medicine has always had, since pre-Hippocrates, we're talking about more than 2 millennia, there's this idea that the doctor knows best. And what's happening, of course, is that that's not the case anymore because people can generate their own data. They can have algorithms to help interpret their data. They're generating data that is not even sanctioned by doctors. They're doing all these things that are a new path of autonomy or semi-autonomy. So the paternalism has to end. I mean, a great example of that is 60-some% of doctors in America believe that the notes from the office visit is their note, and the patient has no entitlement to get the note. Okay, it's their note. Wait a minute, you're the patient. You went in to see the doctor, and you paid the doctor for the visit, and you can't even have the note? Right. And this is the epitome of paternalism. So we have to get over this. It's still there, in spades, and we have to make it so that we are a level playing field. The democratization. That was the patient will see you now. That's where I really zoomed in on the fact that we have to democratize an equal access. Everyone should own their notes and all their data. It's their data. It may even be life-saving in the future of a person's arc. So that's where we have to change.
Another form of paternalism that you're speaking of is this idea that the doctor's time is valuable, so that when he or she makes an appointment with me, if they make me wait for 5 hours, well, the doctor's just busy and is important. But when I, as a professor, ask my students to come into my office at 11, I don't show up at 4 and say, do you know how important I am? Do you know that I am Professor Dr. Gad Saad? Shut your mouth, student, right? But the doctor is entitled to that sense of, entitlement. So is it something that we have to intervene in medical school as part of their training to explain this to them? Is this something that can be taught, or how do we solve this problem?
we are in trained to be this kind of superior mindset, and we have to get over that. It just a new generation, the younger doctors, you don't see this so much, and eventually we will override this problem. But it's in transition now, and it's totally unacceptable to have that type of attitude and behavior.
I mean, and I think, and I'm not trying to just frivolously compliment you, but if someone of your stature, one of the leading publishers in medicine, a cardiologist, a geneticist, can have the humility that you do, then some, mom and pop physician should maybe look to you as a model of how, you can be an accomplished person and yet treat, because short of your relationship with your spouse or your children, the most intimate of relationships, by the very nature of what you're doing when you're going to see your physician, is the relationship between you and your physician. You want that person to be your partner, not your daddy, your rabbi, your scolding you. And yet that's exactly what happens. So my God, if you can make a dent into that, boy, would that be that would be worth the Nobel Prize for peace.
Well, I do think part of it is having more time to bond.
Yeah.
And I do think that part of it is because everyone's so rushed in the clinic, the doctors, whether it's on rounds in the hospital or whether it's in the office setting. And so that's one thing. The other point you're getting at is when you're sick, it's not enough to just have your family and your loved ones. You really want to have a doctor that you can count on, that's going to help you, that it identifies with you, that knows what it's like to be sick, and that it's going to stand with you. Whatever it takes is going to be with you to help you to get better or to hold your hand in a way to deal with this sickness.
Well, I can't cite the reference, but there is a fantastic, I don't know if it was one study or multiple studies, that showed that the number one predictor in mental therapy, like with a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist, the number one predictor of the success of that exchange, that interaction, is not the degrees on the wall or whether he or she came from Harvard or how much postdocs they had or whatever. It was whether the therapist was empathetic. So more importantly, for example, my mother, if she is more empathetic and has only high school education, she may actually be a better therapist for me than a person with an MD and PhD who's a brute in our exchange, right? So that's an example of exactly your point about bedside manners in the context of the clinical therapy exchange, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, another great example that I love is that if I'm a doctor and I give the patient a placebo, and I tell the patient it's a placebo, it's inert, it can't do anything. But if I'm empathetic, it has a huge benefit.
Amazing.
Okay? Versus the doctor who does the same thing, gives the same placebo, but has no relationship and it doesn't come across, with care and compassion. It has no effect. So that is powerful stuff, really powerful stuff.
Amazing. Okay, 2 more questions, and then I think I have taken enough of your time. Number one, you're also someone who is very active in precision medicine, the idea that you tailor-make the interventions to each individual. And as I was reading about what you guys call precision medicine, it reminded me of something from my days as an MBA student. We used to call it mass customization, right? The idea that if you take a fixed manufacturing system, but then you now make it into a flexible manufacturing system, instead of having what Henry Ford said, which is they could have any color they want for the car as long as it's black, meaning that it's fixed. I'm going to tell you which color. Now we could mass produce to your own needs. Well, isn't that ultimately what precision medicine is? It's mass customization of healthcare, right?
Well, in a way.
Okay.
I mean, the reason I say it's a bit different is your analogy with the car is without in-depth understanding of each car.
Right.
That is, the difference here is many layers of information about each human being, which is the essence of their medical self. So, each of us are so unique, and we're unique from our genome and our microbiome and our environment and, our physiology, anatomy. Every layer is different. So the more we understand that, the better we can ultimately be to prevent an illness, that otherwise would occur or manage one. So this is, it's a deeper story with the individualized medicine. I don't like the term precision because it's not very precise. Here we're talking about that I know you, Gad, in depth, unprecedented, and I know you have a risk for this particular condition, and my new job is that you never get that illness.
Right.
That is a different kind of thing, but it relies on this level of data, big data about you.
Right.
Right. We have never been in that era. We're moving into that now because now it isn't just conventional medicine. It's wearing sensors. It's doing the personal ultrasound that you can do on yourself someday. It's having all this data. Your gut microbiome, obviously. All these things contribute to your medical essence.
So instead of precision medicine, maybe individualized medicine would be a better term.
That's my preference, because you want it both accurate and precise. Precise means you can just do it over and over again, but you really want to have it for you.
Got it.
Tailored for you.
Got it. As a cardiologist, I can't let you leave this show without clarifying endless number of contradictions. So examples, and then you can give us sort of one big answer. Well, cholesterol is bad for you. No, cholesterol is good for you. No, you've got to go on statins. No, statins is a bunch of BS. Eggs are good for you. Eggs are bad for you. You should be eating plant-based diets. The Dean Ornish, it reverses the plaque. No, you should only eat meat. I mean, literally for every possible decision that you could think of, I could find you A and not A, B and not B. Please, can you clarify it for us, doctor? What is the state of affairs with all of these issues and any other ones that you could share with us to keep our hearts healthy?
Right. Well, you know what, Gad? It actually goes back to that individualized medicine, individualized health that we were just talking about. And actually, I put a chapter in the book about and wrote about the AI diet, if you will. That is, if I understand you at this very granular, atomic level, if you will, then I could say, you know what, you eat all the red meat you want. You don't really need to take a statin. Don't even bother about the LDL. But what we've tried to do is dumb it down and say everyone should do this, which is the wrong way to. And so that's why we keep making mistakes, because the messages are in every which way, every direction. So as it turns out, we now could say that many factors contribute to your risk and your outcomes. And if we can identify those, we can give you much better advice. So, today, for example, when I see a patient and I have to decide whether they should take a statin, okay, and it's a common situation, one of the most commonly prescribed group of medications, I don't just say, what's your LDL cholesterol? I say, let's get your polygenic risk score, which is, do you have a risk for heart disease, right? And we have an app that for free, it's called My Gene Rank. And right when I'm seeing the patient, we do My Gene Rank, and I say, oh, well, your risk at 100 is only 20. Don't bother with the statin.
So that would be, let's take, excuse me for interrupting you. So that would be, are your parents still alive? Do any of your siblings have heart disease before they were 55? Do you smoke? Do you exercise? What's your weight? We take all of those factors and then we get that final number. Is that basically it?
All those factors plus your genome.
Oh, right.
Data.
Okay.
So the genomic data, which you can get like from 23andMe or many other sources, if we take that data, there's hundreds of letter changes, variants in that that we can use to say, even though, let's say that you didn't have any heart disease in your family, like me, I had no heart disease in my family. I had other problems, but not heart disease. But I have a risk score of 93 out of 100.
Wow.
So I take because the point is that it's the combination of these letters, these variants, genomic variants, that we now know are a marker for heart disease risk, right? So you don't know from your family history. It adds to the family history. It adds to the conventional risk factors, and it's powerful. So when I make a decision, help a decision of a patient, ultimately they make the decision, right? But if I want to advise them, I say, well, you know what, all your risks are low, including your genomic risk. I don't think you need to take a statin. And that's how we do it now. And that's the future.
So that really is, it's exactly what you said. You're answering this last question and tying it to the individualized medicine question of the previous one. It's right. So in a sense, what's happening is the reason why you get all these contradictory, findings is because you are treating the problem as though it's at the aggregate, whereas in reality, I have to recognize the individual vagaries of each individual and then tailor make it, and hence individualized medicine, correct?
Yeah. Today, medicine is like a cattle herd. We treat human beings like they're cattle, and they're all the same. And we have to transcend that because we are so much smarter than that if we use the data. And so that's what's exciting going forward is we won't have all this stupidity where we tell everybody they have to do this or do that, but there are answers that are really guided by that person's data.
Wow. Eric, this has been unbelievable conversation. You are not only an unbelievable scholar, but a true gentleman. Stay on the line so I could say goodbye to you offline. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that we can do it again someday soon.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. You're such a stimulating person to talk to. I've learned a lot from you. Thanks.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed the chat. I'm truly sorry for some of the technical difficulties that we faced. Some of the audio was maybe a bit difficult to bear. We tried our best. We had to call one another several times because the Skype connection was very unstable, to say the least. In any case, I had to do a bit of editing so that it flowed nicely, but all of the content is there. In any case, if you enjoy this type of conversation, please consider certainly subscribing to the channel, sharing these clips with others who might share your interest in such long format conversations. And if you are in a position to contribute through one of my portals, PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar, please consider doing so. It takes a lot of time and effort to prepare these chats for you, and they're available for free for everyone. And finally, if I can ask you to, if you're interested in my forthcoming book, please consider pre-ordering it at your earliest convenience. Thanks so much for your interest, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.